Good morning. Welcome to Kenny Cars and Coffee. We're a couple of minutes late because Facebook kept shutting down on my phone. So we had to do a quick swap over, and I'm here. So this is Kenny Cars and Coffee. For the next half hour or so, I'm going to try to share with you some of my many years of experience in motorsports, building high-performance cars, and just all around just cool car stuff. Today we're going to change the format just a little bit. What you might notice is some old toolboxes in the background. Those are actually mine. I told you before that I spent the first part of my career making my living out of my toolboxes, and there's the living proof. This, my Go box has everything I need to run off to the racetrack, and that baby has been to just about every major racetrack in North America. So today we're going to do something a little different. I got some cool stuff to talk to you about. But first I want to do some quick hitters from the other week that I didn't get a chance to do. A question on pinion angle. Okay, pinion angle is the direction your differential, you look at your axle and where the snout is pointing up and down. The pinion angle is really important. And the pinion angle has to be completely opposed to the angle of the engine and transmission. So if you were to put an angle gauge on the back of the transmission, typically they're pointing down about maybe 2 to 3 degrees. Well, what you want for your pinion angle is to be totally opposite, pointing up 2 to 3 degrees. If they're both pointing, say, down, then what happens is your drive shaft turns into a jump rope. If they're pointing straight at each other, same thing. You get a jump rope, and you can imagine the vibration that creates. So you want one down and one up at about the same. If the engine and transmission are 3 degrees down, you want your pinion angle 3 degrees up. That way you don't have any vibration. We had another question on sway bars, how to adjust the sway bar, and there was another question I want to know about how do you preload a sway bar. Well, that's a red flag. You never want to preload a sway bar. Sway bar should be with the car on the ground at ride height. There should be 0 preload on the sway bar. You should be able to take a sway bar end link in and out without any problems. And the reason for that is a sway bar is actually a spring. In essence, it's a torsion bar. By increasing your front sway bar, increasing your front sway bar, you're actually you're adding an extra spring, adding more roll stiffness, roll rigidity to the front. So if you had the sway bar preloaded, then all of a sudden you've got one wheel that's got more load than the other. And like we talked about before, balancing the front, you go into a turn really hard, slam on the brakes, and you're going to lock up a wheel. And that's not good. So you want 0 preload on your sway bars. Another thing is when people do do corner weighting. You really don't need to do that at track day level. But for race cars, if you do corner weighting, you always have to do it with the sway bars unhooked. So there's no chance that you're using the sway bar as a spring in there. So those are a couple of quick things. Now, just by chance, I got something really cool to show you. And we're getting ready to ship off a set of race shocks to one of our customers who's building kind of a cool NASA AIX car. And he was so kind to let me hang on to these for a couple extra days so I could show you some real race shocks. These are the JRZ Motorsports 11 series. Can you see that on there? JRZ. Now the JRZs are a shock that I got familiarized with Paul when he won the Pirelli World Challenge GTS Championship. He had JRZ shocks, and I can tell you that was one of the keys from him winning so many races because they just work really well. There's a lot of pictures of Paul with 2 wheels in the air going across curbs. And with the valving that comes in the motorsport JRZs, he was able to use the curbs to his advantage. If you get the wrong shock, you hit a curb, it's going to unsettle the car. You got the right shock, you can actually use the curb to go faster. And we use, because of that, JRZ came out with RS series, which we use pretty heavily for our track day cars and street performance cars, and the single adjustable. And the RS series is they take their race shock technology and they kind of move it down a little bit, so we get the price points more affordable for the average track day guy. But there's so many cool things about these. Probably see this great big thing here, remote canister. Now, in race cars, remote canisters are almost mandatory. The remote canister is the bump adjust. You see that on there. And a lot of shocks, double adjustable shocks, you have your your rebound adjustment on the top, and then the bump adjustment on the bottom. Well, if you're in professional racing, if you're out there testing, trying to get the car set up, it's kind of a pain to have to jack the car up and crawl under and adjust the bump. Where if this is neatly positioned, like in the front, under the hood, not too far from the shock, then you just pop the hood and do a couple of clicks to adjust the bump, adjust the rebound. Same thing, we stick them in the trunk, so easy to get to. Some other cool things is that this is like, see how freely this moves? Now, any of the coil-over shocks that you get from us will come just like this, completely built with an initial adjustment in there. I put in there, and I custom select the springs specifically for individuals and how they're going to use it. But also what we do is underneath the spring on the bottom, let me get this picked up. We've got this really nifty thrust washer. That goes down here. That does two things. One, it makes it a lot easier when you're adjusting ride height, but also when the spring's going up and down and everything's working like crazy, you're going to get these little twitches in the spring. And by having a thrust bearing at the bottom and the motorsports come with one at the top, then there's a lot of free movement. You're not going to get any bind. The spring's going to work at 100% efficiency. And some other cool things. Oh boy, these are heavy. But is I don't know if you can see the size of the shaft that's in there. It's a 25 millimeter shaft. That's about 1 inch thick shaft. I think most of the shocks that you get over the counter, like maybe 5/8 shaft size, or this is like almost a full inch, which means you're going to get very little deflection. So I mean, I could go on and on about the superior valving, but this is the real deal. These are real professional grade race shocks. And you're going, that's pretty cool. What do they cost? Well, it's about $8,000 for a set. That's $2,000 a shock. So that's what I say. These are real professional grade shocks, and these are going to go on well, I should tell you about the car they're going to go on. David is building a NASA AIX car, and he wanted a lot of horsepower. He wanted naturally aspirated. And he wanted to do something really different. So what we're doing, it's 2013 Mustang, but instead of using the Coyote naturally aspirated like everybody else is using, what we're doing, we're actually doing an all aluminum stroked 351 Windsor. We were originally going to go for a 427, but in talking to the engine builder, we're having Wagner Race Engines up in Wisconsin build it for us. They thought that 427, the stroke was a little bit too long for a road race car. That if we cut the stroke down a little bit, we'd actually get much better throttle response. So the stroke was cut back. We're going to have about a 401 cubic inch, but it's going to be all aluminum, hydraulic cam, wet sump, and we're going to be over 600 horsepower, somewhere between 6 and 620. So we'll find out when it goes on the dyno. But the whole idea is that package is significantly lighter than the Coyote. And yet, actually, when you see like a Windsor in the front of an S197, the thing looks lost. It takes up so little space. But the whole idea is by taking weight off the nose of the car, we're going to dramatically improve the front to rear weight bias, and with the front end being a lot lighter, the car is going to turn so much better, so it's going to be really quick. So we're going to try to use the suspension and the lightness of the front end to compete with the guys that have the turbos and the superchargers, because they're aren't going to be able to use all their power getting off the corner. We've talked about that before with the supercharger. Somebody get too much power off the corner, you can't get it down. Well, with the suspension we're putting under it, he's getting our the GT4 AGS 4.0 system that we'll talk more about, and something extra special that's coming up this spring that you guys are going to be the first to know about, that I've been working on for years. That's going to be kind of like a real game changer for Mustang suspensions. So this is something that was really cool. I'm glad David let us hold on to it for a little bit so I could show you. But this, when you guys want to get into real race car stuff, this is it. But also I thought I'd show you. This is another JRZ shock. This is actually the RS1. This is our like sport touring shock this is for an S550. And you can see the same thing when you get it, when you order coilovers from us, come together completely assembled and pre-adjusted. The other thing is you'll get, and I don't know if you can see this, but It's a setup sheet that has what the springs are, the spring rates, the initial adjustment for bump and rebound, and then also like for the Pro Shocks with canister, they've got 250 pounds of nitrogen gas pressure in them. And also I forgot to mention, see how big that canister is? That's about twice the size of other canisters that you'll see. And with a canister like that, it just means more fluid, it takes longer to get hot, so it's going to work better. Anyway, back to the single adjustable JRZ 1 that we use. Again, we do the same thing. You'll see a little thrust washer down there, make it easier to turn. And comes with a camera plate. This is single adjustable, so we only have rebound adjustment on the top. And something else that JRZ does that's kind of cool for the S550 cars. Yeah, I don't know if you can see this or not, but there's kind of a cutout there. They give you these little slugs, and they're numbered from 0 to 3, and you can actually use that to put an initial camber adjustment into the shock, which is kind of cool. So you don't have to do as much on top. That's a JRZ RS1. That's our street performance shock, and we use those a lot on S197s as well. And I think something else I'll show you is how to tell spring rate. How to read a shock for spring rate. Now, most shocks will have markings on them. We use iBox quite a bit because they're easily accessible and they're really good spring. I don't know if you can see this. I've got a number on there. Yeah. And it says 0600.250.0550. The way you read these is the first number, the 0600, that's the length of the spring. So that's telling you it's a 6-inch spring. The second number, the 2.50, that's the ID. That's 2.5 inches. Now our JRZs are actually 2.25, they're 2.25 inches on the ID. And the last number, 0550, that's the spring rate. So now you know how to read a spring. The first number is the length, second number is the ID, and the third number is the spring rate. Okay, moving right along. I guess I should probably tell you how much this shock costs as well. The race shocks are like $2,000 a piece. These are a little more reasonable, but they're still super premium shock. The touring JRZs, and there's a touring version of this that is for touring, but actually is good enough to go to the track. In the JRZ, the touring is like $2,900 for a full set complete. The JRZ ones like this for S550 are $4,500. So a little less than, somewhere around half the price of the race shocks, but they're still every bit as good because the technology that's in those race shocks go into the shocks we use for the track. Okay. Well, we got out with us today. I'm trying to read. This is kind of hard for me. This little bitty phone is way far away, but let us know who's there and what kind of cars you got, because that's always handy. Boy, just really hard. Oh, I need to talk about our Speed Therapy Society. Okay, the Speed Therapy Society is going to be a private group in which we're going to do my 5-day online workshop. It starts March 30th, and it's titled Transforming Your Driving Experience. I'm putting together like a 5-day curriculum sort of based off of a lot of the questions that we've received in and people want to know. And it should be kind of cool. And we're going to do it in a private group. And the reason we're going to do it in a private group is because it gives us much better flexibility and more options for communication. Facebook has all kinds of like quirky little things. Like the first week we were so successful with Cars and Coffee, we had like 3,200 views. And last week it's like 500. So we were too successful, and now I guess Facebook wants us to pay money so we can get to more people. So in the meantime, you guys can help by giving me all your thumbs up and inviting your friends to join us. And I think we're going to be a link up there somewhere. I don't know if it's up there or not, but
I'll add it right now.
She's going to add a link. So it's either going to be out there or there, or I don't know, there somewhere. There'll be a link so you can invite your friends. So, that kind of is the big things we wanted to talk about today. We talked about the pinion angle, sway bar, performance philosophy. How about just a little bit on wheels and tires. My philosophy on wheels and tires, first of all, wheels. 18-inch wheels are for race tires, 19-inch are for street performance and track day, and 20 inches for show. And the reason I say that is for 18-inch, all the race tires are 18-inch. So that's why 18-inch tires for race cars. Now, the street cars, I really like 19-inch. I got a lot of tires, a lot of tire choices, a lot of tire sizes for the 19-inch. So that's why I like that. And like 20, I'm not that fond of that for a track wheel and track tire. You got an awful lot of mass in the 20-inch wheel that you don't need. And as far as sizing, in the SN95, when we were running Kermie, we ran a 19, actually by then it was 18 by 9.5. Now we run, because that's all that was available, now we run 19 by 9.5 with a 285/35 all the way around. Really, really good fitment for that car. And we've got a customer that, Roy, who's racing, that we put him up to originally up to 315 in the back on an 18 by 11-inch wheel. And after we put the Daytona prototype motor in his car, then we moved him up to, I believe it was a 13-inch wheel and a 335 or 45, but we had that kind of like a little fender flare in the back. So I mean, you can get by with a 9.5 front and 10.5 rear on SN95. And the right wheel, you can do an 11 up to a 315, but you need to be sure that you got your back spacing right. S197s, pretty much the standard wheels we use is a 1910 front and 1911 rear with either a 285/35 front or a 295/30 depending on the application, and the 305 at the back. And then again, we can sneak them up to 11.5, maybe 12, and squeeze in a 315. But you need to really be careful because you're running into the shock absorber and inside, so you sort of have to get the right wheels for that. So that's kind of like the sizes I use the most. 385/35 is like number one. It makes a really good square tire all the way around. And then for S197s, 385 front, 305. 285. Excuse me, 285 front, 305 rear. That's a really nice package on 10, 11-inch wheels. In fact, that's what I ran on Ruby all the time. And I did on Ruby. I was using front tires on the 285, so I did go to a 295 on a 10-inch wheel. And I actually, to help cut down the front tire wear, I went up 50 pounds on rear spring rate, which is something we'll get into in the workshop. Using spring rate I was using this. Increase the spring rate in the back to make the front work better. Seems weird, but that's kind of the way you have to do it sometimes. So there's a little bit on wheels and tires. And we always talk about tire temperatures, how important they are. You have to do tire temperatures if you get to the track. And again, that'll be more on, we'll get into track tuning a little bit with tire temperatures in the workshop. I think somebody asked about understeer and oversteer, and last week I gave my really simplistic explanation for understeer and oversteer. Understeer is when you hit the wall at the front of the car. Oversteer is when you hit the wall at the back of the car. Meaning understeer is also kind of referred to as push. It's kind of like when you turn the wheel, the car really doesn't want to turn and it keeps going. It's got to turn more and more and more, put more turn into it, you get more scrub that you have to turn, and or lift off the gas to get the front to bite. In the back, when it's the oversteer, it's like, the back's getting too loose, and you need to control that. If you had to choose between one or the other, understeer is far preferable to oversteer. Now, some people say, "Oh no, I like my car nice and loose. I can drive it like that." Well, it might look pretty spectacular. It might be quick for maybe a lap, but it's going to wear you out, and you're going to get caught out. When I set cars up to qualify, we'll set them up just a teeny bit on the loose side, because that's going to be a little bit quicker for qualifying. But for the race, pull that back out and just make it so there's just a little teeny bit of understeer, because having oversteer for an entire race, you're going to wear the driver out, and at some point he's going to make a mistake. So it's better to have just a teeny bit of understeer. to kind of keep the car safe, because the way you fix understeer, you take your foot out of the gas. You know, people when they get oversteer, they think, oh, the way to fix oversteer is to put the foot into the gas and get that thing going sideways. Well, you really can't do that very much before you get caught out. So that's kind of like the understeer, oversteer thing. And oh, we got a question?
They're talking about the JRZs right now. Conversation going on about what the front and rear shock spring rates are on the JRZ1, and also if it affects ride quality.
That's a really good question. The question is about the spring rates that we're running on JRZ1. Okay, on the race shocks, the way I've got it set up for David is the car he's driving now. He's driving a Mustang track car. He has a pretty soft spring and shock setup. So I want him. Eventually, we're going to get a really high spring rate in the car because that's going to be really quick. But I want to move him into it. So I'm using the same spring rate that we use for our advanced drivers, and that's a 650 front and a 400 rear. Now, eventually, because he's going to be on sticky tires, we're going to move him up to get into that 800 range, where the car's going to be really quick. But if I were to put him at 800s right away, I mean, when the higher the spring rate goes, you know, the smaller your window for error gets. So you have to really have a lot of a feel for the car. So it's better to start. We'll start him at 600, then go or 650, then maybe 7 or 750, and work our way up. As he gets used to each, then you move him up to the next driving plane. Now these are also set up with a 650 front, and but these are this is for the IRS car, and I think we've got something like an 1,100 pound rear, something like that. I can't remember, but that's because it's not on the shock. It's still on the control arm. So that's because of motion ratio. We'll get into that in the workshop. Motion ratio changes your spring rate. Now, motion ratio is if you got a control arm this long, like a coil-over shock, you'd be out here and it's straight up and down. But if you got a big coil spring on the control arm in here, you got to factor in the motion ratio, or the distance it is from the pivot point to the outside point. And there's a formula for that. Don't have it on top of my head, but we can get into that. But for street cars, I think we talked this before. I'll go back to it again. Most of the spring rate that comes from the factory, like from a Mustang, for example, is around 175 front. As far as off-the-shelf springs that you can get to go onto those shocks, you're 220, 225 maybe, is about as high as they'll go. And then you don't really have any control over ride height. Whatever the lowering spring is, it is. And with the coilovers, you know, we can control spring rate. You know, it's really simple. And here's a spring. Want to change rate? Pop it out. Pop a new one in. For a street performance, I use for touring, for street touring, an S197 and also S195. I use about 350 front. And I always talk about fronts because the rear becomes a function of the front based off of a whole bunch of different things. We're roughly 30-40% less in the rear than on the front. And then our street performance is about 400, which is fine for the street and is really good for novice, even up to intermediate track day. It gives you enough spring to make the car turn. And as far as, you know, ride quality, its ride quality comes from the shock absorber, the valving in the shock. All the spring holds the car up. The shock is where you get your ride quality, because the motion that's going into the shock has to dampen both the up and the down. You know, the bump dampens the up, and the rebound dampens the down. The rebound actually is controlling the oscillation of the spring, and the bump is controlling, you know, the coming up. So, I mean, if you've got a good shock going up in spring rate, you're not going to notice. It's going to be firm and sporty, but it's not going to be harsh. Now, some shocks, aftermarket shocks, I don't want to be too specific, but mostly I don't like the Japanese style valving, because it seems like when you turn the shocks up, they get harsh. Rather than getting firm, they get harsh. Where I like the European, have a different philosophy of shock valving. JRZs, Coney, Bilstein, the way they look at dampening is completely different.
I have a couple of questions when you finish.
So, okay, and we're going up in spring rate. So it's like, you know, that 400 street performance is good for novice, even up to intermediate. Moving into, you know, somebody's kind of an intermediate, but still on like street tires, maybe a 500, even 550. But when somebody starts to move to advance and starts using a tire with more grip, like the Pirelli B0 courses or the, you know, the Michelin Sport Cups, we'll go up to us like a 650 front. The thing about spring rate and tires is the stickier the tire, the more spring rate you need. And the reason for that is when you've got a really sticky tire, it's going to, obviously it's going to grip more. It's going to grip more, and you're going to have more input on roll in the car. So the more the tire grips, the more you want to control the roll, which means the more spring you put into it, and also the spring rate in the tire itself. Something that we've run into that I strongly recommend against is people that have stock suspensions on their Mustangs going out and buying slicks. They're going to get racing slicks on their car. They're going to go really fast. A couple of things are bad about that. Number one, you've got a mismatch between tire compound and spring rate. And the two things that will happen, most commonly that will happen, number one, you're going to tear up the tires because you're going to get so much roll in the car. You're not going to be able to get enough negative camber into it. It's going to start tearing up tires. I mean, because the tires aren't used to or aren't designed for such soft spring rates. The other thing that we've had happen to people is they put slicks or super sticky tires in the car, and they find a way to drive off the track because there's not the control it's the suspension's designed for, and the control the tire is looking for are two different things, and that is disaster. So if you're going to run a slick, you got to have a high spring rate. Like I say, for Paul's World Challenge car on with Pirelli slicks, 850 was about as low as we ever went, and you can go like up to 1,000. I know Porsches love to run like on 1,000-pound springs. So you can see, you know, to go really fast, you need a lot of spring. You need slicks in spring rate, and the shot and the on the car has to match what the tires are engineered for. So for track, if you're using just a standard tire, 400, 500-pound springs are great. As soon as you move into a stickier tire like a Corsa, Trofeo, Sport Cup, then you can get into that like 650 range, and you're going to keep going faster. The more spring you put into a Mustang, the faster it's going to go. The reverse of that is if you go too high in spring rate and have like a street tire that's got like a 250 or 300 tread rating, you're not going to be able to get the full advantage. You're going to have a mismatch. It's kind of like you have to kind of tuning. Track tuning is experimentation, and I've done enough of it that I can share with you that kind of save you some time. But even for me, when I go to a track, it's like everything is best guess. You know, I'm making adjustments based on all my knowledge. I'm making the best guess, and sometimes I'll guess wrong. Most of the time I guess right because I've done it so much. But even so, it's like a game. Getting back to the sway bar adjustment. You know, you don't want to preload a sway bar, but I recommend for people that have like you get a sway bar. It's got 3 holes in it. You know, that's 3 different adjustments on the sway bar. You know, start with the middle hole, and this Cars and Coffee. I can use a little coffee right now.
I have a couple more questions related to the shots.
And with you got the 3 holes in the sway bar. The one all the way to the end is going to be the softest adjustment. The way all the way in is going to be the firmest, and that just has to do with the leverage. And it's like adding more spring. I recommend people, you need to understand how the sway bar works for your car and your driving style. Start with it in the middle, and then for one session, soften it up. See what the car feels like. Write it down in your notebook. We'll get into notebooks in the next couple of weeks too. Then try it on make it firm. See what the car does. There's a lot of times where we've had bars, we made them firm, and the drivers go, "Oh God, the car doesn't like that. Go back." So it's every driver, every day, every track, every car is different. So you really have to just work it out on your own and keep a notebook, which is something we're going to get into. And we had another question.
Yeah, but first, you need to remind me to do this again.
But first, I need you to invite your friends again so that we can get more coverage on this. And also, there's going to be more information on the group. Signing up for the Speed Therapy Society group will be coming your way
Newsletter.
in the newsletter.
So I haven't signed up for the newsletter. And
This is like cue cards on TV or something. I should have, maybe it's a teleprompter.
okay, and the couple of questions that we have
And
is Herstifer wants to know what the lowest spring rate you can go on the front of an S550, and is it the same for the GT350?
okay, it's kind of a trick question. Herster wants to know what's the lowest spring rate you can go on the front of an S550. I would say what comes to the factory, which is like maybe a 175, something like that. If you want performance, you really need to be in that 400 range. Even our touring package for the S550s is a 650 front spring. And it's 650 on the 550s works a little bit differently than the S197s just because of the design of the suspension. But that's, I mean, I like the 650s I use more than any other spring because it's such an all-around spring rate. And then the same on the GT, yeah, pretty much the same on GT350s. They come with a little higher spring rate. Off the top of my head, I think maybe it's a 175, 180, and I think the track packages are maybe 220, 225. I'd have to go back and look it up, but the same thing. I mean, you get up into that 400, 500, 600 pound range is when your cars really wake up the car and make them go. I mean, we have a customer that had this 1917 550 that we had JRZs on it. We had the Pro Plus on the front, which is the RS series. The top of the RS series is the Pro Plus, which is a remote canister double adjustable, and pretty much because we had 650 pound springs, we had good springs, we had the good shocks. At track days, he would just fly around GT350s because he just had so much mid corner speed and so much corner exit speed that he could carry it down the straightaway. And we've talked about that before. I mean, it's all about how you get through the corner and get off the corner. I mean, the faster you are getting off the corner, the faster you're going to be at the end of the straightaway. And I see that all the time, like at Road America, where they got big, long straightaways, and you think like GT500s with their big supercharged motors will just romp and stomp. But with Ruby, my 2012 GT4 track day car, GT4 RS, I mean, I would carry so much more speed off the corners that I'd fly past the GT500s because first of all, they're a lot heavier and they don't carry as much mid-corner speed, and secondly, they can't get all that power down and start spinning tires. So I'm just gone. So, I mean, it's spring rate. It helps you get into the corner and get off the corner, and getting off the corner is the most important thing to getting good speed down the straightaway. You had another question?
Yeah, this is one related to the sway bars. Ask people to send in some questions right now.
Okay. If anybody else has some questions, go ahead and send them in. We'll try to get to them.
Okay, this one is from Justin. On the topic of sway bar adjustment, what is the appropriate amount of chassis roll on a tire to get ultimate traction in a corner? Are there wear patterns to look for on the tire that are not in that appropriate roll amount?
Okay, that's kind of the question is, what's the amount of, say that again?
Okay, on sway bar adjustment, what is the appropriate amount of chassis roll on a tire to get ultimate traction in the corner?
The amount of roll on the tire to get traction in the corner. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to be none. You don't want the tire to roll. We talked about this before with using tire temperatures and pressure. You want to, I mean, the tire is going to, Mustangs have a positive roll front suspension, which means the more the chassis rolls, the more the tire goes positive. That's why we add initial negative camber, so when the car rolls in a corner, that negative camber actually straightens up and you get a perfect flat footprint on the track. You want the biggest tire contact patch you can get. I don't like tires that roll. I know I see some people show up at the track and they take like white shoe polish and they put it on the tires, and you ask them, well, that's to see how much the tire rolls over. And it's like, what's that telling you? It's not telling you how much contact patch you got. You're just telling you how much you can scuff the outside of the tire. It's all about contact patch and letting the car roll the least amount. Increasing sway bar will reduce the roll in a car. And that's kind of getting back to where this all started. If the car is rolling too much, you can make the sway bar stiffer or go up. and the car's not going to roll so much. But then again, you get back to, then you need to make some adjustments with your shocks. It's a game, and we'll get more into this. And it's trial and error, and you have to keep working with your car, keeping notes. I did this today, and this really cool thing happened, and it felt really great. I did this the next session, and wow, that was the wrong thing to do. It's all about trial and error. Like I say, every driver, every track, every day, every car is different, and we've even gone to tracks where we've had the, in racing, we've gone to the track, we went through like 2 days of practice, and got the cars just set up perfectly, and the next day for qualifying, it's kind of like out the window. We almost have to start over. So like I say, every track, every day is different. So it's just a matter of understanding your car. The more adjustments you make, the more you get used to it, the better adjustments you'll make when you need to. Another question.
Okay, this is from Brandon. He wants to know the difference between a Panhard and a Watts on a S197. He has a white line Watts right now.
Okay, this is an excellent question. One of my favorite questions. Brandon wants to know the difference between a Watts link and a Panhard bar. Well, first of all, both a Watts and a Panhard bar are used to locate an axle. When you don't have splayed control arms, you need something to locate the axle going back and forth. A Watts link and a Panhard bar do the same thing, although they do it differently. The Watts link has a belt crank that kind of pivots and keeps the axle located. It goes up and down. The Panhard bar has it kind of crossed, and it keeps the axle centered that way. And the big difference, and the reason I don't use a Watts link, even though the Watts link is actually the best way to locate an axle. Where the pivot point is on the Watts link is where the rear roll center is. And on Watts links, they're typically about the same as where the stock Panhard bar location is on Mustangs, like pretty much right across the middle of the axle. And I don't like the roll centers up that high. I like the roll center down low, because the roll center is the point that the back of the car wants to roll around. And with a stock Mustang going around the corner, you really hard, you can kind of feel that inside wheel kind of want to lift up a little bit and get light. That's because the roll center is high. You move that roll center down, and it's not going to roll up as much. And on the Panhard bar, wherever the Panhard bar crosses the center line of the car, that's where the roll center is. So a Watts link with a pivot is kind of like you can't really, because the belt cranks, you can't really move that down very far. But back in the old Trans Am days in the late 90s, what we used to do is we used to take a Watts link and we'd mount it horizontal to the bottom of the differential. And that was easy to do because you've got the chassis axle runs underneath the rear axle. So that was easy to put a Watts link on the bottom and then go off and pick up the chassis. And that way you've got the benefits of a Watts link, but you also put the roll center at the bottom of the differential. That's a little difficult for people to do in their garage. In fact, we actually did that back in about 2001 or 2. We made a setup where we used the bell crank off of a Crown Vic, and it decided that was something that people just couldn't do in the garage. So we went to the other best way to do it, and we have, like, in our rear grip kit for S197s, which is the rear suspension package, it's called the roll center relocation kit. And we actually have bracketry where we take the Panhard bar, we move it all the way down to the bottom of the differential, just like we did in the Trans Am cars, which is about as low as you can get it on a live axle car. And that makes a huge difference by bringing the rear roll center down, and with our front grip kit, which is the K-member control arms and stuff. We'll talk about that more at length in the 5-day class. We bring the front roll center up so that the car, when it goes through a corner, doesn't want to roll up. When the roll center is high, as you go through a corner, you're not feeling that left or the inside tire getting light. You're also feeling the opposite front tire start to dig in and push, and it's getting overloaded. So I bring the front roll center down, front roll center up, rear roll center down. The car doesn't want to roll as much, which means with the geometry we've got in the rear grip kit, you actually get to the throttle before the apex. Okay, so the car isn't rolling as much, so you don't have to wait for the axle to settle. That's when the roll center's up, you're going around the corner, you have to wait for the axle to settle to get to the gas, because if you get to the gas too soon, whoop, it's that old oversteer thing, you're going to hit the fence with the back of the car. But with the roll center down, the car doesn't want to roll up as much, so you're a little flatter through mid-corner, so you get to the gas sooner and you get a better launch off the corner. So Watts lengths, the Watts lengths are great if they're used on the bottom of the differential, but otherwise, you know, I go with a Panner bar because it's simple. There's something, you know, we'll be talking about later in spring. I think it's going to blow your mind when we get to that subject. But that's kind of where we are. And the whole rear grip kit we've got for the S197s is the upper controller module, the lower control arms, the axle brackets, and the roll center kit. Every single piece has an impact on making a positive improvement in the geometry, which is why that these rear grip kit just is amazing. In fact, we have the GT500 guys that absolutely swear by it, because anybody that's driven a GT500 with Spirit knows all about oversteer. And with a rear grip kit, you know, you can't take it away because there's just so much torque in that motor, but it just does an amazing job of settling down the back of the car and adding grip. Well, I think we're kind of running out of time for today.
We have one more question.
Well, okay, we're going to squeeze in one more question.
And this is from Chris Sauter. And do you want me to read it, or do you want to try to?
No, read it to me.
Okay, Ford Racing sells a stronger rack and pinion. It's the Boss 302 R for racing in the Racing S197. Any thoughts on that? And is this helpful with the front grip kit?
Okay, the question is, Ford Racing has he's calling it a stronger rack and pinion for the Boss 302R for S197s, and my thoughts on that. Well, actually, it's not stronger. What it is, it has a completely different calibration, and it's calibrated for racing. And if you can get one, absolutely. It is a huge improvement in your steering. It just does a whole bunch of things better. Works like seamlessly with our front grip kit. In fact, somebody asked, I think last week also, they had our H&R Street Performance shock setup. Want to know if that would work with front grip kit? Absolutely. I mean, the front grip kit is nothing more than geometry. It takes and fixes what's wrong with the geometry in the front, which means any spring, any shock, any steering rack is just going to work seamlessly with it, and actually it's going to make the steering rack or the shocks work even better. So I think
That's it.
I got my director over here telling me what to do. I'm director or producer, I don't know what it is. Oh, don't forget to join us next week. Next week I'm going to kind of go over a little bit some of the topics we're going to talk about in the 5-day class. Remember to sign up for the Speed Therapy Society group. Like I say, it's a private group, and we're doing that because it's going to be much easier for communication, gives us more options to communicate, and it's going to be, you know, kind of more like a group type thing. So we're going to be just filled up with all kind of like-minded people. In the U.S., I guess we'd be gearheads, but if we were in the U.K., I guess we'd be called petrol heads, for those that like to watch U.K. car shows. And remember to invite your friends. And I asked for last week. I asked for some closing statements, and Roy, who is one of our great customers with an incredible '99 Cobra AIX car, reminded me some of the ones that I said, like keep the shiny side up and smooth is good. One more I'm going to add. Just remember that grass doesn't